Welcome to the online tutorial on photosynthesis and cell respiration. On this tutorial, I'll explain how organisms obtain their energy. First of all, we have to classify organisms into two different groups. We have autotroph and heterotrophs. Autotrophs are basically represented by plants and any other organisms that can obtain their energy from the sun. Now, autotrophs are able to obtain energy by the process of photosynthesis. So what is photosynthesis? Well, photosynthesis is a food-making process that happens in autotrophs where they take light energy from the sun and convert it into chemical energy, and it's stored in the glucose molecule. For this to happen, we need ingredients. So the starting ingredients would be carbon dioxide and water, and in the presence of light, these two will combine to produce glucose and oxygen. When we are talking about plants, this will happen in the leaves, especially in the chloroplast of the leaves, where we can find the green pigment called chlorophyll. Just to clarify, light is a type of energy which we can see. It's called the electromagnetic radiation, and it's pretty much harmless unless you are exposed to it for a long period of time. If you are, you can get sunburned. Plants are able to trap this light energy by the use of chlorophyll and other pigments found inside their leaves. Photosynthesis can be represented by this chemical reaction where we have carbon dioxide and water as our reactants, and in the presence of light we're going to end up with glucose and oxygen as our products. Photosynthesis can be divided into two stages. The first one happens in the thylakoid, and it will need light to split water into H2 and oxygen. And the second stage will happen outside the thylakoid in the stroma, and it will use CO2 and H2 to form the molecule known as glucose, our food molecule. This diagram further shows where the two stages of photosynthesis happen inside the chloroplast. We have the thylakoids, which are the disc-shaped structures inside the chloroplast, and the stroma is the space outside the thylakoid. For the first stage, we will need light, and then for the second part of it, in the Calvin cycle, you will need CO2 to combine with H2 to produce glucose, our food molecule. Plants play the most important part in the cycle of nature. Without plants, there could be no life on Earth. They are the primary producers that sustain all other life forms. This is because plants are the only organisms that can make their own food. Animals incapable of making their own food depend directly or indirectly on plants for their supply of food. All animals and the foods they eat can be tracked back to plants. In addition, oxygen we breathe comes from plants. Through photosynthesis, plants take energy from the sun, carbon dioxide from the air, and water and minerals from the soil. Then they give off water and oxygen. Animals and other non-producers take part in this cycle through respiration. We have important plant structures that allow photosynthesis to happen in plants. We first have the stomata, which are little tiny pores that allow for gas exchange, and then we have transporting groups of cells, which we call tissues, and those allow water and other nutrients to move around in plants. Xylem will move them upwards to the leaves, and phloem will be moving nutrients and water downward and to other parts of the plant as well. This diagram shows the little tiny pores found on the surface of leaves. We call those stomata. This is a diagram that shows the difference between xylem and phloem. Remember, xylem only moves water and nutrients upward, and phloem will distribute them to the rest of the plant. How do plants use glucose? Well, at the end of photosynthesis, glucose can be used right away for energy by plants. They can be stored, or they can be used to build more plant tissue. So remember, photosynthesis is a food-making process. The energy from the sun is captured by autotrophs and stored in the glucose molecule. For this reaction to happen, we need carbon dioxide and water as our reactants in the presence of light. The products of this reaction will be glucose, which is a food molecule, and oxygen. So how do heterotrophs, such as animals, obtain their energy? Well, they do this through the process of cellular respiration. Cell respiration is a process that takes chemical energy and converts it into a form that the cell can use, in this case ATP. This process is one of the key ways a cell gains useful energy to fuel cellular activities. For example, cell division and active transport. We obtain chemical energy by eating food. 70% of this energy is used to keep our bodies and organs functioning properly, and 30% is used for physical activities and digestion. Cell respiration can be summarized with this chemical equation, where we take glucose and oxygen to give off CO2, water, and energy. Notice that this chemical equation is pretty much the opposite of photosynthesis. Cell respiration can be divided into three parts. The first part happens in the cytoplasm, and it's called glycolysis. This reaction doesn't need any oxygen to be present. The second and the third one are aerobic reactions, meaning that we need oxygen to be present in order for them to occur. They happen in the mitochondria, and the last reaction is responsible for creating the most ATPs. Remember, the mitochondria is the powerhouse or the generator of energy for the cell. You will probably find more mitochondria in a muscle cell than in the skin cell, just because the muscle cell will need more energy in order to contract. Just as a side note, mitochondria have their own DNA. So what is ATP used for? Well, it's basically used to create more of you. Cells need to divide, and for that they need energy. They also need energy to transport certain nutrients back and forth the cell membrane and to send signals. The structure of ATP is composed of an adenine molecule, a ribose, and 3-phosphate. The bond that contains the highest energy would be this last one. Remember, ATP is the charged molecule. Once the energy is released from the last bond, it turns into ADP. We call it adenosine diphosphate because it only has 2 phosphate groups. So remember, ATP is used for cellular work. Once it's depleted from its energy, it turns into ADP. You can turn it back to ATP thanks to the energy found in foods. Cell respiration is a lot like a car. The mitochondria would be the engine of our cells, where sugar is burned for fuel, and the exhaust, or what's given off, is CO2 and water vapor. In certain situations, cells do not get enough oxygen, so they switch to another process called fermentation. We have two types, lactic acid fermentation and alcoholic fermentation. They both produce 2 ATP molecules. This happens in the absence of oxygen, or also called anaerobic conditions. The process of fermentation done by certain organisms such as bacteria, yeast, and fungi can be of benefit for humans. Some of the products that they can do for us would include cheese, yogurt, wine, beer, and vinegar. On the other hand, animal cells such as ours will switch to lactic acid fermentation when our bodies cannot deliver enough oxygen to our cells. For example, during an intensive workout. Lactic acid fermentation will provide our working muscles with energy for a short period of time. However, this process will increase the acidity in the muscle, causing a burning sensation on our active muscles. As a result, the painful sensation will get us to stop overworking the body and force a recovery period so that the body can clear the lactic acid and other metabolites. So to summarize, cell respiration is a food broken down to release energy. As a byproduct, carbon dioxide is given off. This happens in all organisms inside their mitochondria all the time. Glycolysis is followed by fermentation if oxygen is not present in the environment. An important part of this lesson is to realize that photosynthesis and cell respiration are linked together. The products of one are the reactants of the other one. So what I mean by that is that if we take a look at photosynthesis, The products of photosynthesis, oxygen and glucose, are used as the reactant of cell respiration, and the products of cell respiration, which are CO2 and water, will be used to start the reaction for photosynthesis. And this is the end of this online tutorial. I hope I have answered all your questions. If you have any, please let me know. Thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.